The promise I'd whispered at Silas's deathbed was the only thing colder than the Montana wind howling outside. It snaked through the cracks in the farmhouse, a constant reminder that for years wasn't long enough to chase away the chill of loss or to lessen the weight of an oath. "Don't let him take it, Nora," Silas had breathed, his eyes clouded by the mysterious fever that had claimed him too quickly. "Solitude Creek is yours. Don't ever let Thorn have it." For years. For years of lonely days, each one a silent battle against the unforgiving land, the brutal winters, and the judging eyes of Redemption Gulch. They looked at me, a 13-9-year-old widow, and didn't see a woman trying to uphold her husband's legacy. They saw an obstacle, an anomaly. They saw the prime land of Solitude Creek and wondered how long a woman alone could possibly hold on to it. No one wondered louder than Jedediah Thorne. He owned the bank, the general store, and damn near the soul of this town. He was a fat spider in the center of his web, and I was the only fly he hadn't yet devoured. His lust for my ranch wasn't just greed. It was a personal affront. My independent existence was a challenge to his absolute authority that day. The blizzard hit without warning, a sudden white wall that swallowed the sky. I'd gone to town for supplies, miscalculating the weather's fickle turn. The road back to Solitude Creek was now lost under feet of snow. Martha, the owner of the general store, whose eyes were always sympathetic, but whose voice was always cautious, shook her head when I asked for a room. "Thorne's booked the entire boarding house, Nora," she said, avoiding my gaze. For his new hired guns? Of course he had. It was another move in his chess game, cornering me, leaving me to the cold. There was only one other place in town with its lights on and a fire burning, the Golden Spur Saloon. No place for a respectable widow. But tonight, respectability was a luxury I couldn't afford. The air inside was thick with the smell of cheap beer, tobacco, and wet wool. The din of drunken laughter and clanking glasses died the moment I stepped through the door. 40 pairs of eyes turned to me, their silence heavier than the noise had been. I ignored them, walking to an empty table in the farthest corner, feeling their stares like needles on my skin. I ordered a black coffee, hoping I would soon be forgotten. But Jedediah Thorne never forgot. He pushed away from the bar, his 5 cronies shambling after him like wolves trailing their alpha. He was a large man, his gut straining the buttons of his expensive waistcoat, and his smile never reached his small, greedy eyes. "Well, well," his voice boomed across the saloon. "Look what the storm blew in. Lost your way, Mrs. Vance?" I looked up, keeping my voice even. "Just waiting out the storm, Mr. Thorne. All alone?" He smirked, looking around theatrically. "A beautiful woman like you shouldn't be alone on a night like this. Especially not in a place like this." His men snickered, forming a loose circle around my table, cutting off any escape. I could feel the cold, sharp tendrils of fear in my chest. But I had made a promise to Silas. Fear was not allowed to win. My hand, hidden beneath the table, moved quietly toward my retier. It was then that I noticed him. He sat alone in a dark corner, almost swallowed by the shadows. He wasn't like the others. Where the men of Redemption Gulch were either rough-hewn or bloated with self-importance, this man radiated a lethal stillness. He was lean, taut as a leather whip, with a sun-scorched, angular face. He wore the worn but clean clothes of a hired hand, but the way he sat back straight, away from the wall, his gaze taking in the entire room, was not the posture of a simple laborer. His eyes, under the brim of a faded hat, were the color of a Montana winter sky, cold and clear. And he was watching, not staring, but I could feel his gaze, a quiet, calculated attention. "I hear the bank turned down your loan," Thorne continued, his tone shifting to one of false sympathy. "A real shame. Winter's coming. It'll be hard for you to manage all on your own." "I'll manage," I replied, my fingers now closed around the cold metal in my bag. "Of course you will," he scoffed. "You were always a tough one. Silas picked his wives well. But everyone has a breaking point, Nora. Sell to me. I'll give you a fair price. You could move to a city, live a comfortable life. Forget all this." He reached out his fleshy hand, intending to place it on mine. That's when I moved. Before his fingers could touch my skin, a dry click cut through the saloon's silence. Every eye snapped to me. The double-barreled Remington Derringer Silas had given me on our wedding day now rested in my palm, its muzzles aimed squarely at the center of Jedediah Thorne's bloated chest. It was a lady's gun, small and elegant with its pearl handle, but Silas had been right. It would put a man down just as dead. Thorne froze, his ruddy face paling. The smug smile was frozen on his lips. His men shuffled, unsure what to do. The entire saloon held its breath. "Move your hand," I said. My voice steady, though my heart was hammering like a trapped bird, and stepped back. "Unless you want to see if a widow can put a hole in a tub of lard from this distance." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then a small sound broke the tension. It was the scrape of a chair on the wooden floor. The stranger in the corner had shifted. He hadn't stood, hadn't drawn his weapon, but he'd changed his posture. Leaning slightly forward, his right hand now resting casually near the Colt holstered on his hip. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it changed the dynamic of the room. It wasn't a direct threat to Thorne so much as a silent declaration. A presence. Thorne noticed it too. His eyes flicked to the corner, then back to me. The surprise in his gaze was replaced by a cold anger. He slowly drew his hand back, raising both in a gesture of mock surrender. "No need to get heated, Mrs. Vance," he snarled. "Just a friendly conversation. Our conversation is over," I said. The Derringer, never wavering. He gave me one last venomous look, a promise of future retribution. Before turning on his heel and stalking back to the bar with his cronies, the saloon slowly came back to life, but the conversations were now whispers. An eye still darted furtively in my direction. I sat there, the gun still in my hand as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a tremor in its wake. I didn't dare look toward the stranger. I didn't understand his gesture, and that worried me. In Redemption Gulch, nobody did anything for free. I took a sip of my no-cold coffee, trying to steady my nerves. I would have to sit here until the storm passed, a cornered porcupine surrounded by predators. The snow stopped by morning. The sky was a cruel, brilliant blue, and the world was blanketed in a pristine white that hid all the ugliness of the night before. I made it back to Solitude Creek as soon as the path was passable, feeling exhausted but with a stubborn flicker of pride. I had faced Thorne, and I had won. At least, for one round. I was in the barn, feeding the horses, when I heard the sound of an approaching rider. My heart seized. Maybe Thorne had decided not to wait. I grabbed the rifle from its pegs on the wall, ducking behind the barn door to peer out. It was him, the stranger from the saloon. He rode a sturdy roan, and as he drew closer, I could see his face more clearly in the morning light. There were crow's feet around those winter sky eyes, and a faint white scar that ran along his jawline. He was no boy. He was a man who had seen things, and not all of them good. He stopped his horse in the middle of the yard, but didn't dismount. He just sat there, hands resting on his thighs, waiting patiently. He didn't call out, didn't seem surprised to see me emerge with a rifle in my hands. He simply waited, his gaze sweeping over the house, the barn, the fences that needed mending in a practical, appraising way. I stepped out of the barn, the rifle still firm in my grip, but pointed at the ground. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. He touched the brim of his hat. An old-fashioned, polite gesture. "I heard you were looking for a hired hand," he said. His voice was low and even, with no hint of artifice. I narrowed my eyes. "Who did you hear that from?" "This town doesn't keep secrets for long," he replied, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. "And after last night, I figured you could use another reliable gun." His directness disarmed me. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't offering pity. He was making a business proposition, stating a simple fact. He had seen my vulnerability, and he was offering a solution. But why? "I can't pay much," I said, testing him. "I don't require much." "Room, board, and enough for ammunition," he said. "My name is Caleb Rivers. Most folks call me Cal. Caleb Cal Rivers." The name meant nothing to me. I looked deep into his eyes, trying to find a sign of deceit, some hint of a plot by Thorn. But all I saw was a steady calm, a deep-seated weariness, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of empathy I had long since stopped hoping for. Desperation is a poor counselor. It clouds your judgment. But sometimes, it also forces you to take a chance. I was desperate. Thorn wasn't going to stop. His collection of hired guns was growing, and I was alone. With a 2-shot Derringer and a promise that was becoming too heavy to bear, "You have experience on a ranch, Mr. Rivers?" I asked, my tone shifting to business. "I do, ma'am." He nodded. "I can mend a fence, tend a stock, shoe a horse, and I can hit what I aim at." That last sentence hung in the cold air between us. I made my decision right there, under the brilliant, unforgiving Montana sky. I didn't know if I was inviting a savior or a serpent into my home, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep fighting alone. $30 a month. Plus room and board, I said flatly. "There's a small bunkhouse out back. You start now. The fence line on the north pasture needs checking." Cal Rivers nodded once. He swung down from his horse, moving with a fluid grace that surprised me. As he walked past me to hitch his horse to the post, I caught the scent of leather, horse, and the cold outdoor air. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," he said. As I watched him get to work, a stranger who was now my sole protector, I felt something stir in me besides fear and loneliness. It was a dangerous feeling, but not the kind of danger Thorn represented. This was an internal chaos, a realization that the solitude I had clung to for 4 years, the fortress around my heart, had just developed a crack, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to fix it. The silence Cal Rivers brought to Solitude Creek was heavier than the previous 4 years of loneliness combined. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but a silence thick with unspoken things. A tangible presence that filled the spaces where only the wind and my memories had once resided. For the first few days, I watched him like a hawk, searching for any sign of deceit, any gesture that might reveal him as Thorn's spy. But Cal gave me nothing. He worked with a quiet, almost mechanical efficiency. He moved about the ranch with a clear purpose, now mending fences with decisive movements, tending to the horses with a gentleness that contradicted his calloused exterior. He never initiated conversation, only answering my questions with brief, polite replies, and always. He called me Mrs. Vance. That formal title was a wall he erected between us, a constant reminder of our places. He was the hired hand. I was the mistress, a widow. That distance was both a comfort and a strange irritant. I was used to men looking at me with desire, pity, or contempt, but Cal's gaze, it was almost nothing at all. His eyes would pass over me as if I were just another part of the landscape, like the hills or the barn. For a woman accustomed to being scrutinized, that indifference was almost an insult. And, if I were being honest with myself, it was also deeply intriguing. The boundary between us shattered on a Tuesday morning. I woke with a nagging sense of unease, an unnatural quiet hanging in the air. When I went outside, I understood why. The gate to the north pasture was wide open, and my best cattle, the herd Silas and I had worked so hard to build, were gone. A cold panic seized me. This was it. This was Thorn's next move. Not just threats in a saloon, but a direct assault on my livelihood. I was about to run for a horse when Cal was already there, his roan saddled and ready. He didn't say, "I told you so." He showed no alarm. He simply handed me the reins to my mare. They were driven west, toward the Badlands, he said, his voice even. The tracks show to riders. "We need to go now." For the next 2 days, I saw a completely different Caleb Rivers. Out in the harsh wilderness, he was no longer the quiet hired hand. He was a warrior. He read the tracks on the ground like I read a book, pointing out disturbed rocks and broken twigs I never would have noticed. He moved with a cold confidence, pushing us onward with an almost inhuman endurance. He rationed the water, chewed on a piece of jerky, while his eyes constantly scanned the ridges. We found the herd pushed into a narrow canyon, just as Cal predicted. 2 of Thorn's men were making a campfire, complacent and unwary. Before I could speak, Cal signaled me to be quiet. He dismounted silently, moving like a ghost through the sagebrush. I heard two short, efficient thuds, and then silence. When I cautiously approached, I found the two thugs unconscious on the ground, tied securely with their own ropes. Cal was calmly putting out their fire. "They'll wake up in a few hours," he said, not looking at me. Enough time for us to get the herd home. On the ride back, a different kind of silence fell between us. It was no longer distant. It was filled with my reluctant respect and something I couldn't name in the way he would occasionally glance at me, as if to make sure I was still there. His competence, his calm in the face of danger, had done what no words could. It had breached a part of my defenses. In the evenings that followed, our routine changed. I started bringing 2 cups of coffee to the porch instead of 1. We would sit there, watching the darkness settle over the valley. The silence was gradually filled with pieces of our lives. He told me of his years in the cavalry, not of the glory of battle, but of its cost, of the friends he'd lost, of the senseless violence that had made him leave. He spoke of memories' avalanches, the ghosts that whispered on long nights. In return, I shared. I told him about Silas, not as the sainted memory the town held, but as a good, practical man who had given me security and companionship, but not the fire I'd read about in books. Our marriage was an arrangement, I confessed one evening, my voice trailing off. A partnership. But I grew to care for him, and I will not let anyone take what he left behind. Cal didn't offer platitudes. He just nodded, his winter sky eyes seeming to understand the things I hadn't said. "Partnership is important," he said quietly, "but it isn't everything." Our eyes met in the flickering lamplight, and I felt a stir of something I hadn't felt in years. A recognition. He wasn't looking at me like a widow who needed saving, but like a woman. An equal thorn, unable to break me with sabotage, turned to financial strangulation. My loan was denied. Suppliers suddenly refused me credit. And then, Solitude Creek, the lifeblood of the ranch, began to run low. Cal rode upstream and found what we both feared, a new, crudely built dam, illegally diverting my precious water onto Thorne's land. It was a declaration of war. Desperate, we had only one option: to dig a nearly 2-mile ditch to channel water from a smaller spring. For days we worked under the hot sun to people against a mountain. Sweat and dirt became a part of us. We shared bread in a canteen, our bodies aching but our wills unbroken. In that shared toil, a new intimacy was born. I noticed the play of muscles in his arms as he swung the pickaxe, the way his shirt clung to his back. He noticed the stray hairs that escaped my bandana, and once he gently brushed a smudge of dirt from my cheek. His calloused fingers grazing my skin, leaving a trail of fire, and then came the town dance. I didn't want to go, but I had to. Hiding on the ranch would be a sign of weakness. I needed to show Thorne and all of Redemption Gulch that I was not beaten. I wore my best dress. A silk gown, the color of jade that Silas had bought for me on a trip to Denver. The moment I walked in, the room of music and laughter fell quiet. Thorne stood there, a smug grin on his face. He waited until all eyes were on me, then raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Double quotes, Mrs. Vance. You look stunning. Having a strong young man around the house must be putting a spring back in your step." The room erupted in snickers and venomous whispers. A hot flush of shame and anger burned my cheeks. I stood frozen, feeling more alone than ever, and then Cal was beside me. Where he came from, I didn't know. He was washed clean and wore a fresh shirt, his damp hair combed back. He ignored Thorne. He ignored the curious stares. He looked only at me, and for a moment, we were the only two people in existence. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice low and clear, "may I have this dance?" He held out his hand. It wasn't a question. It was a rescue. I placed my hand in his, and he led me to the floor. As the fiddles started up and he drew me close, the world faded away. He was not a graceful dancer, but he was solid and sure. His hand on the small of my back was a steady anchor, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt safe. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just moved to the music, an island of peace in a hostile sea. I looked up at him, and his gaze was no longer distant. It was warm and intense. It was saying things his mouth had never dared. But when the music ended, reality crashed back in. The whispers, the stares, the truth of who I was and who he was. My employee, a man years younger than me, Silas Vance's widow. Panic seized me. This was wrong. It was too dangerous. I pulled my hand away abruptly. I need some air, I stammered, unable to meet his eyes, and fled to the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. The next morning, the wall was back up, higher and colder than before. When I met him in the barn, I had my words prepared. "Mr. Rivers," I began, my voice dry. "About last night. It was a mistake. It can't happen again." I expected him to argue, or at least look hurt. But he just looked at me for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice perfectly even, "I'll do my job." His sudden return to that formal, detached manner hurt more than any recrimination. It confirmed that my fears were valid, that the chasm between us was impassable, and it made my heart ache with a foolish, inexplicable pain. Thorne, of course, capitalized on the rumors. Whispers of the wanton widow and her hired hand spread through town. I became more of an outcast than ever, but it only hardened my resolve. If I had to fight alone, then so be it. In a desperate attempt to find any financial leverage against the bank, I began going through Silas's old papers. In a dusty trunk, I found it. An old leather-bound ledger I had never seen before. Inside were not the familiar figures of cattle and seed, but pages of cryptic notes, strange numbers, and odd symbols.
Why did you help me?
Because it was the right thing to do.